I'm Renee Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. Really great show today. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about.
I am so excited we have Dr. Kenton Sena back with us. He's been here before, but he's with the Lewis Honors College, but he's affiliated with our department here, the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. He's used to work with us on a more regular basis, still works with us quite a bit, but he's going to be talking about the benefits of urban reforestation. He's been involved with these reforested bluegrass sites and trying to evaluate the effectiveness of that. So he's going to be talking about that. So we're glad to have Kenton here. Then we also have Dr. Ellen Crocker. She's here every week with us almost, and we're so delighted to have her. But she's going to be talking about what's bugging my tree. And I think, some of you all will recognize what she talks about real quickly because they're kind of all over the place right now. They're popping out. And so I'll save that for Dr. Crocker to kind of reveal here in a little bit. But you'll find out what's bugging a bunch of trees here in Kentucky real soon. And then we're going to have both Kenton and Ellen come back, and they're going to talk a little bit about a survey that they're trying to do. And they're looking for some feedback from you all related to reforestation. So stick around for that. And I'll wrap us up with a couple of announcements on some upcoming programs that we have coming up in May. So glad to have you all with us. You can use the chat function to interact with us via Zoom. If you have questions via YouTube, hit us at forestry.extension@ukyi.edu and we'll get your response.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started. So Kenton, if you'd like to turn on your camera. Welcome to the show. We greatly appreciate you being on, and tell us a little bit about your topic today.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. I'm always excited to visit with y'all back in my old stamping grounds in Forestry.
Exactly.
I am chatting today about urban reforestation. So planting trees in cities and why I think it's good and why I think we should keep doing it. Yeah, so I think planting trees in cities is great, and I think we should keep doing it. And I'm excited to share some thoughts as to why. Benefits of urban reforestation. I wanted to start by kind of thinking about urban spaces in an ecological context. So both US and global population is becoming increasingly urban. The human population is increasingly concentrated in these like small urban areas. And those urban areas are characterized by high air pollution. That air pollution can include emissions from industrial development, like factories and so on, as well as emissions. So I think about this every time that I walk down the street in Lexington, which is not a very polluted city, but every time I walk down the street in Lexington, I smell the exhaust, and I just think about everything that's going into the air in our cities. So vehicular emissions are a major source of air pollution in cities for sure. Urban areas are characterized by what's called the urban heat island effect. So cities tend to be hotter than the surrounding rural areas. And that has to do with reduced cooling from shade from trees and reduced evapotranspiration from trees, as well as just that all the built environment that holds on to heat really well, like that pavement and building materials and so on. Urban areas also have a lot of issues with water pollution and changes in stream flow regimes. So if you think about in an urban area, everything that is on kind of any impermeable surface, any surface like roofs or streets or parking lots, and honestly, a lot of the material that's on lawns gets washed into urban streams when it rains. So you might think about human waste. If there's a sewer line break like we have had in the past here in Lexington, pet waste, if that waste isn't being picked up from lawns, any kind of lawn treatment like fertilizer or pesticide, residues might be getting washed off lawns. Trash, we do a trash pickup once or twice a year that I organize here in Honors, and I'm just always amazed at how much trash ends up in our streams here in Lexington. Any kind of fluids from vehicles that leaks out onto parking lots and so on. You've seen those oil slicks under your car sometimes, and all that material gets washed out into urban streams. So a lot of water pollution issues. And then also cities just tend to have less green space, which maybe is a no-brainer. And that green space tends to be lower quality than in other kinds of areas. So kind of a crash course on urban ecology. Urban streams, we'll focus on urban streams and urban forests. Urban streams, this is a picture from a trash pickup that we did in Town Branch. You can kind of see the banks of this stream are just covered in honeysuckle, which is an invasive shrub. And we're just pulling bags and bags of trash out of the stream. And you can see up ahead, there's a couple bridges that are crossing over the stream. So there's a lot of kind of interaction between the stream and the built environment. So in urban development area, green space, that's either in lawns or trees or other kinds of vegetative cover is getting converted into primarily impermeable or impervious surfaces like parking lots, streets, and roofs. And so all of those surfaces are just shedding water really fast during rain events, rather than that water soaking into the soil, which would be common kind of pre-development. That water is getting flushed right off the surfaces into some kind of stormwater management system. And then oftentimes it's going very quickly into streams. And so urban streams tend to have, in addition to that water quality impairment that I mentioned earlier, they tend to have to deal with a lot more runoff and kind of flash flooding. And oftentimes they have been channelized or restructured to try to make them a little bit more resilient to that. But unfortunately, like ecologically, there's a lot of issues with the hydrologic regime in these urban streams. Urban forests tend to be fragmented and kind of small and like small patches. We don't have like really large intact forests in cities for the most part. And the forests that we do have, you can kind of imagine where our forest fragments are, for example, in Lexington and wherever you're from, in your kind of urban and suburban area. Those forest fragments tend to be separated from one another, like these little patches here and there, and they're not all together, not very well connected typically. And so that presents a lot of challenges for wildlife habitat, for example. So critters are not able to travel as safely from kind of one forest patch to another patch because they're exposed in between those patches. That creates a lot of edge effect. So those forest fragments tend to be more exposed and vulnerable to other kinds of challenges like invasive species. So here's a picture of a reforested bluegrass site in Masterson Station Park, where we've been doing invasive species removal for the last few years. And you can see it's just a lot of Amur honeysuckle in the understory there. And then this site also has, I don't think we can see a ton of it here, but this site also has a lot of winter creepers. So we're going to have to go back and do some additional management for that as well. But so our urban forests are kind of threatened by or just made vulnerable by this fragmentation and this exposure to invasive species. But urban forests, I think, are really well positioned to address some of the ecological problems that we have in cities. And that's what I wanted to talk about in large part today. So urban forests capture air pollution. There's a lot of research that has documented that the air pollution that comes from vehicles and other sorts of sources in cities actually is captured by the foliage of trees. And then it can be washed off into the ground during a rain event. So it's a really cool kind of opportunity for trees to really actively filter that air pollution out and improve our air quality. That's a great benefit of urban forests. A lot of research is exploring the usefulness of urban forests to mitigate some of those stormwater issues that I was talking about. So we have all these impermeable surfaces that are shedding water into streams really quickly. What if we could kind of convert back some of those impermeable surfaces to forested areas, or implement trees in our stormwater infrastructure in some innovative ways, so that those trees can pump that water out of the ground and help to reduce the amount of water that's being shunted to streams during rain events. Urban forests also provide a really critical opportunity for just people who live in cities to experience nature. This is, I think, a an undervalued kind of benefit of urban forests, but it's really critically important for humans to experience nature. And in cities, we have less opportunities to do that. And our urban forests give us really critical opportunities to have that kind of experience. They do provide really valuable wildlife habitat. So there's a number of studies that are exploring urban forests as wildlife habitat and thinking about the kinds of factors that contribute to good quality habitat and bad quality habitat and so on, and how those forests can be managed for improving habitat quality. And they also store carbon, a significant amount of carbon. So we can, in the face of kind of global climate change and some of the concerns that we're seeing with that are becoming increasingly at the forefront of our public discourse, urban forests, I think, represent a really great opportunity to get some of that carbon out of the atmosphere and back into biomass. So, great benefits of urban forests. But what about planted urban forests? And this is where the urban reforestation or afforestation question comes into mind for me. So we have all this like well-documented information about how urban forests are really good at doing these different ecological things that are really great to improve environmental quality in cities. But what about tree planting? Like, is that a thing that we can do? Are those planted trees like successful? Do they actually develop into urban forests, or are they kind of a different thing? Are they not as successful? Like, what happens to these trees that we plant as part of our tree planting events and so on? And that's been a major focus of my research for the last 3 or so years. And I'm really interested in and passionate about exploring the constraints of urban reforestation and the opportunities that are presented by urban reforestation. I think it's a really critical need right now, and I hope that we'll be able to continue to study that and share that out more broadly, so that more people can plant more trees in more cities. Anyway, so much of the research into urban reforestation involves trees that are planted into existing forests. And so here I have a picture of a student who was helping us with a tree planting project in Masterson Station Park. I think this one was last year. So we took tree seedlings that were grown in LFUCG's nursery and planted them in the understory of this existing forest patch. So this is a forest patch at Masterson Station Park where we had previously removed invasive species. Then we went back and we're planting some native tree seedlings in the understory there. That would be like what I would consider an enrichment planting. You're just planting trees where there are already trees, which is a great thing and really beneficial. A lot of the research into urban reforestation has explored that. What I think is less well understood is planting trees into areas that have no trees already. So into like mowed fields, or abandoned agricultural sites or those kinds of things in an urban area, maybe vacant lots or whatever, going into those kinds of sites where there aren't already trees existent. And then planting trees in those sites and seeing if we can convert those formerly not forested sites into forested sites. A couple folks have done some studies on this in the Northeast, and they've documented a few interesting things about how when you plant trees into these unforested sites, they do support recruitment of other trees as birds kind of come and roost on those seedlings or saplings as they're growing. They deposit additional seeds, and so you start seeing recruitment of other plants around them. And they also did a lot of work on site prep work and found that using compost can be really helpful to improve site quality for planted trees and so on. So we have some information out there, but I think there's a lot more to learn. So this is a picture of my firstborn. We recently participated in Reforest the Bluegrass. This is Silas out there with a dibble bar, and off to the right, PowerPoint cropped him out, but this is one of my students in my Ecology of Middle Earth class this semester, out there channeling his inner tree beard and planting some trees. This was part of Reforest the Bluegrass at Heisel Park just maybe last week, the week before. So Reforest the Bluegrass is a world-class urban reforestation program that has been coordinated by the city of Lexington for the last 20 plus years. To my knowledge, this is the only program of its kind in the world where we have discrete planted urban forests at different time points with this kind of consistency and this kind of scale. Lexington has engaged thousands and thousands of volunteers and planted hundreds of thousands of trees on over 100 acres at this point over this time period. So a really phenomenal program. Up until 2020, we didn't have a lot of data on how these sites were performing, like as forests. They had been really well recognized, I think, as community events and recognized for their excellent community engagement, but we didn't have as a strong kind of sense of the forest development of these sites. So I was fortunate to get a little funding from the Sustainability Challenge Grant program here at UK to hire some undergraduate students and do a survey of all the reforested bluegrass sites in 2020. We collected data on plant communities, soil, birds, and water quality on some of the sites. And we've been able to carry forward some of those analyses and surveys as we've moved on. So our first paper from this was published in 2021 in the Journal of Forests. And I, together with a couple colleagues from Forestry, Zach Hackworth and John Laka, did some analysis on trees that were growing on the sites. And we're able to document that the planted trees are surviving and growing to form a canopy on these planted urban forest sites across Lexington. That canopy is shading out the understory. So we're seeing some interesting developmental factors or features at play in these developing forests. Overstory trees are predominantly native trees, which is really great. That's really great to see that we're not seeing a lot of introduced or invasive species in the overstory. The unfortunate thing, which is consistent with the literature on urban forests, though, is that we do have a lot of invasive species in the understory of these planted forests. So a lot of honeysuckle, Callery pear, and then some non-woodies like a winter creeper and so on. So a lot of, definitely a lot of problems with respect to invasive species. But I think it's really cool to see to be able to quantify the success of planted tree growth and formation of a canopy over time. That's really great. Our next project, with Zach, and then Julia was one of the undergraduate students who helped actually do that work as part of her honors thesis. We collected all the data on the understory plant communities, the non-woody plant communities, and we're able to document that even though typically during a reforested bluegrass planting, the focus is just on planting trees. It's not really on cultivating an understory plant community that would be typical of forests in this region. Even though that kind of typical or focused or intentional understory plant community cultivation isn't going on, we are seeing plant communities shift over time. They're actually shifting to become more shade tolerant and so on. So really interesting kind of shift in plant community composition over time in these sites. And I think a great opportunity to further study development of those understory plant communities as well as the trees themselves. We also noticed a lot of problems from invasive species in this layer of plants as well, and noticed that in some plots with high invasive species presence, there's kind of a consequent or associated decline in native species diversity there. So there's some continued argument for continued management on these sites. We also looked at water quality on some of these sites, and I just wanted to show quickly or conceptually what we're talking about here. This is the Masterson Station site. A nice long riparian area was reforested along this stream. We've been collecting water samples upstream of that reforested area and downstream of that reforested area for the last year and a half or so, and then doing a series of water quality assessments. And what we're seeing in some of the sites that we're surveying is that nitrate concentrations are consistently and significantly declining from upstream to downstream sampling locations. And we think that that is an artifact or a result of the trees that have been planted in these sites actually pulling nitrate out of the water, which I think is a really great outcome of riparian reforestation. If we can reduce nitrate exports to the Gulf of Mexico, that's a great thing, and we should keep doing it. We've not seen a strong signal with water quality as told by macroinvertebrates or stream-dwelling insects, but we're continuing to do research in that respect as well. Wildlife, we've got a couple studies ongoing. We're collaborating with John Cox and his student Kai Davis to survey birds in reforested bluegrass sites, and we'll have hopefully some more data on that over the next short time. And launching a comprehensive bat survey this summer with colleagues from EKU. So really excited about that. So urban reforestation is good. We should keep doing it. Reforested bluegrass is an excellent model. It's a world-class model, and I think other cities should adopt it and implement it. And we're going to keep researching it. And I hope that you are able to get out and enjoy and experience your urban forests and help care for them as well. Thanks to everyone who's helped with reforested bluegrass work over time, and some references, and hopefully we have time for questions.
Well, thank you so much. That was very interesting. I really enjoyed that presentation.
Yes, me too, Kent. And I remember when I was an undergraduate here at UK and I was participating, we were crew leaders in some of those reforest, sites. So it's really neat to see that progression and see, how much these things have changed over time, but really how they're actually functioning and contributing in your all's efforts. So really cool work, and just really to kind of bring all this together to kind of highlight this and get us some real data that we can use. So great work for the whole team. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's funny that I didn't know a lot of people here before, because I was on the committee when I worked at the city. I was on the committee that started Reforest the Bluegrass. So it's just interesting to when you told all that about Masterson Station, I was like, yes, it actually helped. That's awesome. It's just really neat to see, because that was like 20 years ago. It's really neat to see how things just come back around, and that it actually did benefit. So that's wonderful news. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you for doesn't look like we have any questions, so you answered everybody.
Well, and hopefully you've inspired some others, to maybe do something similar in their own communities, right? If you all are interested, and perhaps you're all in an urban or semi-urban area across Kentucky, and you need some trees there's opportunities to get them planted. So, take inspiration from this, please.
Definitely.
As
Thank
always,
you.
please.
All right, so moving on, we are now have Dr. Ellen Crocker with us, and she's going to talk about some kind of bug.
Oh, Dr. Crocker, I think once you show this, everybody's going to be like, oh, I've seen that.
Yeah. So today I'm talking about what's bugging my tree. So something you've probably noticed, and just kind of giving you some names for what you might be seeing, whether it's in your trees or maybe as you're driving down the side of the road, you're like, what is that thing? So if you've been noticing some silky webs popping up on your trees, and if it's springtime and those trees are cherries or plums or apples, you are likely seeing the work of the eastern tent caterpillar. So in this edition of What's Bugging My Tree, we'll talk a little bit about what eastern tent caterpillar is, what it looks like, and some potential lookalikes, and also what it means for your tree. So what is eastern tent caterpillar? It's a native insect that's widespread in eastern North America, so all over, and it impacts trees, cherries, plums, apples, and other related species. That caterpillar will eventually grow into a moth, but it's the caterpillar stage that most people notice, because that's what's eating leaves and creating those really distinctive little tents, thus the name eastern tent caterpillar. So the females lay eggs in masses around twigs of trees and that rose family. In the summertime, these sit waiting until the following spring when they hatch. And then, of course, they form these distinctive silky tents. Those tents protect the caterpillars, both from anything that's trying to eat them, but also creating the right conditions for them. These eastern tent caterpillars come out. One of the first things to emerge in the spring, right when those leaves start coming out, leafing out. And so, it's pretty cold then. Those tents create the right moisture conditions, the right warmth needed for those caterpillars to develop. So these are social caterpillars. We don't normally think of caterpillars that way, but they like sticking together, and they will feed in mass. They will stay in their large groups, and they leave the tent several times a day to feed, and then eventually coming back to that tent for protection. Eventually, those caterpillars will form cocoons that will then develop into adult moths, and the cycle continues. The caterpillars eat the leaves of trees, and in some cases, they can completely defoliate those trees. While this looks bad, trees are typically fine and will set out a new flush of leaves and will recover without problems. This might be a minor stress to trees, and I know that some people think it looks really unsightly, not just the loss of the leaves, but those tents in the trees, but it's really not a major health concern for those trees. Outbreak years might happen occasionally, but it's unlikely that the same tree is going to be impacted year after year after year, and that this is going to be a serious issue. On the other hand, in addition to their impact to trees, another thing that makes eastern tent caterpillar notable is their impact to animals. So they are considered potentially damaging to horses and have been linked to mare reproductive loss syndrome in horses. And, some of this is still up in the air and less conclusive, but there have been some studies done that have shown that when pregnant mares feed on eastern tent caterpillars, they might have a higher risk of failure. And because of this, extra caution should be taken in areas where pregnant mares are located, and the host species for eastern tent caterpillar, things like cherry, might be undesirable in places where you have pregnant female horses. So that's something to consider. And I know it's made the news in the past when there have been major mare reproductive loss syndrome events. So maybe not a big problem for your trees, but something to consider if you have horses. So a little bit more on the identification of eastern tent caterpillar. Again, it's one of the earliest emerging caterpillars in the spring, and these caterpillars are going to grow as they age. They go through different stages, and in all of those, they're going to be covered by these hairs, which can defend it somewhat against things that want to eat it. It's also worth noting that those young caterpillars are going to look a little bit different from those older caterpillars. So those young caterpillars here, you can see some here on this tent. They have these two thin little yellow stripes along their back. Meanwhile, the kind of older caterpillars are going to be much longer and have one stripe that runs down the back, as well as some other colors on the side, blue and yellow and black as well. So the tents that eastern tent caterpillars make are typically located where the branches and the trunk meet, or either way, a little bit closer into the tree. They like to hang out together and feed together during the day and hide out in that tent when they aren't feeding. You can see in this case, you've got some of those younger caterpillars. Those egg masses of the eastern tent caterpillar are smooth and shiny and wrapped around a twig. And again, these will all eventually develop into adults that are kind of furry and nondescript and brown, tan, light brown color with these white stripes on their wings. Now, I say all of this, and I think it's also important to note that there are a lot of potential lookalikes. We have a lot of other caterpillars that either are already in the area or could be in the area in the future that can kind of look like the eastern tent caterpillar. Here you can see a picture of the eastern tent caterpillar and a few others. So I just wanted to walk through some of those differences. Eastern tent caterpillar, again, has this one line down the back, yellow or kind of a white color. And then others that you might see would be something like a forest tent caterpillar, which is another native caterpillar, but it's got more of these keyhole shaped dots on the back. This is fall webworm, another caterpillar. It's really, really hairy though, and doesn't have quite that same coloration. And this one right here is the spongy moth. While the eastern tent caterpillar, forest tent caterpillar, and fall webworm are native insects, this is an invasive insect that we don't want to see in our area. If you live in Kentucky, hopefully you don't see any of these, but in other parts of the country, spongy moth is established and can cause major defoliation events. And you can see here it's got different colored dots on the back, blue and red. So each of those caterpillars looks slightly different. And then another way to tell them apart would be, how are they living? Eastern tent caterpillar has those really obvious silky webby tints right at the point where the branches meet the trunk typically, although sometimes those might be a little bit further out. But if you're thinking of something like fall webworm, not only might you see that a little bit later in the season, but they're going to have looser tints that are going to kind of be in a little kind of further out on the branches, not as close. And then another thing to consider is, what is it feeding on? So eastern tent caterpillar really likes those trees in the rose family, your black cherry, your plum, apple, crabapple, and others. Whereas some other species might have different preferences. And their egg masses will also differ, but something I think worth noting is that of these, only that invasive spongy moth that I mentioned is going to be considered a major forest health issue to trees. Sometimes you can get outbreaks of some of them that locally can cause more damage, but less of a major concern. And so when it comes to management, if the trees are healthy, typically no management is needed. They might look bad. They might be totally defoliated by eastern tent caterpillar, but they will probably bounce back just fine. Now, if you can reach those tents, a really easy way to manage them would just be to destroy them. So reach those tents and pull them out of there. That's easy enough, right? Now, sometimes it's not so easy if they're high up in a tree. But on those smaller trees, not only could those be physically removed, the tents, I would do this when those have just started forming and those caterpillars are really small. You could also prune out or remove the egg masses that are on those twigs before they hatch. There are also both chemical control options with insecticides, as well as biological control options with BT. Those are going to be most effective when the caterpillars are very small, so they just hatched. As soon as you see them hatching and the tents forming, that's the time to apply. But for the most part, those aren't going to be necessary in terms of the tree health. And under no circumstances should tents be set on fire. I'm not sure where this idea came from. And while it might kill the caterpillars, the potential risk to your tree far exceeds the risk of the actual tent caterpillar. So not a good idea, especially when these caterpillars pose no real risk to your tree. So thank you for joining me today and learning a little bit more about eastern tent caterpillar. If you have any questions, we will take those now.
And you can put away your torches. Sorry.
What I felt like. I know one time I texted Ellen because I was like, Ellen, there's something in my tree and it looks just like that. It was awful. So,
well, I was driving
right over
along
my deck.
I was driving along the highway this week, and I was planning to talk about a different thing this week, but I was like, no, we should talk about this just because I'm seeing so much of it on the side of the road. Places where black cherry likes to grow and other species that this caterpillar feeds on. You'll see them right now, especially if the leaves haven't come out, fully yet. So those tents really stick out like a sore thumb.
A very timely topic.
Definitely timely, but I see those and I was like, ugh.
So that's
Eats
another
those.
thing.
Do we know?
you know, again, I think they're pretty cool. So I guess I'm biased in that. And I'm sure any entomologist would agree with me that they're a perk, not a negative. But I've heard from a lot of people that it's just unsightly and they don't like it, in addition to being concerned about the health of their tree. And if that's you, just know you can pull them out of your tree when they're small. You can physically destroy those tents and kill the caterpillars that way, or there are other management options.
I can imagine like orchards and others could be really have some major
Yeah, that-
impacts from these.
Mhm.
Mhm, definitely.
Oh,
Well,
Dr.
thank you,
Carter,
Ellen.
thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Always good to talk with you all. Appreciate having me on.
Well, and don't go away too far.
You're going to talk about a Reforest the Bluegrass survey, right? And we're going to have
Yeah.
Kim
Yeah,
back
so
on as well.
I want to invite Dr. Senna back to chat about something that we're doing at some of the Reforest the Bluegrass sites.
I'm back. Thanks for
So-
thanks for the invitation.
So one of the things that I know you've done a lot of research on the Reforest the Bluegrass sites, and it's really exciting to see the big impact that that program is happening locally. But I think one of the questions is, what do people think about reforested sites, right?
Yeah, and this question came up fairly early in our field work in 2020, because it was either in the same day or in just a stretch of a couple days, I encountered a local resident who said that he walked through one of the sites every day and it was like the woods to him, like this kind of hiking opportunity, and he really enjoyed that kind of nature experience. And then another resident who said that we should cut them down because they were weedy and attracting varmints. And so just very like diametrically like opposed opinions about these different reforested bluegrass sites, which really kind of made me curious, like, okay, well, what do people think about reforested bluegrass sites? Are they generally on one side or the other? Are they more moderate? Do they just not even know about them? Like what do people think about them? And then I guess maybe and the next step after we figure out what people think about them would be, well, do we need to share more about urban forests, or or what, as far as that goes, to kind of help people to better appreciate what they're doing for us. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So one way that you can get involved in this work, we need your help. So we want to hear from you on what you think about the Reforest the Bluegrass sites, whether you live here in the area and visit them all the time, or you haven't been yet. You can take a virtual tour of the sites and let us know what you think. So we've got 2 ways to get involved. Again, we want to hear what people think about them. If they have concerns, are there ways that we can manage to address those? If there are things that people really like, are there ways to emphasize that going forward? So the 2 ways that you can get involved: first, if you go to one of the Reforest the Bluegrass sites, and there are a lot of them around, you'll see at many of them some lawn signs that advertise a survey. What do you think about this site? Please take a picture of that with your phone, go to that kind of QR code there, and let us know what you think of that site. In fact, you can do that for a bunch of different sites. You don't have to just do it for one. So we want to hear from you on that. But then 2, if you are not in the area or you don't think you're going to get to one of those sites, we also have a virtual tour and survey. And so right now on the screen, hopefully you can see the a virtual tour of Reforest the Bluegrass. So if you click on this link, or you go to this link, or you take a photo of this QR code, you'll be able to take a virtual tour of some different sites, as well as let us know your thoughts on those. Anything else you'd like to add to that, Dr. Senna?
No, just both of those things. Yeah, go to some sites. The city is really interested in folks actually going into reforested bluegrass sites, and they want people to know that they're there, they're public, they're for you to access and engage with. So yeah, that we are kind of working with them to try to get the word out, to invite you into the sites, invite you to share your thoughts about them. And then, yeah, like Dr. Crocker said, if you can't get out there, take the virtual tour and give us some feedback that way. So,
Yeah, and for that virtual tour, we were really fortunate to partner with the City of Lexington's arborist team. So you'll hear from them as well as Dr. Senna, myself, and others about those sites, kind of what's happening in them, why do they look the way they look, and where are they going in the future. So with that, help us out, take that survey, and let us know what you think.
Sounds like a really interesting thing that if you can't go out there, you can at least see what's being done and kind of tour it as you go along. So that would be a really interesting thing to do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I made note of that URL, so I'll check
I
it
do
out.
too.
Yeah, thanks for letting us share that here and look forward to hearing from folks.
Wonderful. Thank you both for so much. We appreciate you both talking about this and both of your presentations.
Yeah, no doubt. Good content. Good guys. Thank you.
So Billy, we have some upcoming things that are coming up in May, and you're going to talk about them.
Yeah, we got a couple programs I wanted to kind of highlight and let folks know. These are actually in-person programs, as well as I'll give you a highlight of kind of our May topics on From the Woods today. So I'll go ahead and share that now.
Okay.
All righty, there we go. All right, so coming up in May, wanted to announce a few programs that may be of interest to our viewers or others with a forestry, wildlife, natural resource bent here in Kentucky. So the first one I want to talk about is a cedar management workshop, and this is coming up on May 20th. And this is being put on by the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, as well as USDA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and Kentucky Division of Forestry. And it's going to be happening down in Mercer County in South Isa. Actually, it's going to be on a property, and it's just a morning program from 9 to noon, and they're going to be covering a lot of topics. So certainly in central Kentucky, northern Kentucky, Renee, we've got a lot of cedar trees, right? And a lot of times people don't know what they can do with them, or they can manage them, or what they should do with them, right? So this is going to be talking about that. So it's a great way to get some information. If you do have property that has cedar trees on it and you're unsure of what you can or should do with them, this is the program for you. So they're going to be talking about fallow field management, thicket management. You know, there are some opportunities to get some pulpwood out of some of those, depending on where you're located. Or if they're larger trees, they can actually be sawn. You know, we can get boards out of those trees as well. So they can actually do a timber harvest in there. There are some invasive species issues that you're going to have to deal with all of our forests, unfortunately, and cedars are no different in that. But also kind of what you can do going forward, right? How do you manage that, or how do you get rid of it? What's important to you? It's really going to be based on your objectives. But it's a great way for you to come out and meet some professionals, see a property, see some of the work that's being done there. They are going to feed you lunch, so that's always a good thing. But you do have to register to get the location, the exact details on that. So please register. You can take note of that URL there and register for that upcoming workshop. So I encourage you, again, if you're a landowner or someone with interest in Eastern red cedar and what it's doing here in Kentucky, this will be a great workshop for you. So big thanks to all the organizers for that event. Next one I want to talk about is a workshop we got coming up on May 23rd. That is going to be a joint workshop between a number of us, but we're going to be talking about a lot of different things at the Bullitt County Extension Office. And really what we're targeting is landowners that may not be engaged in natural resource management. These may be new landowners, or these may be landowners that are unaware of some of the support available to them. So we're going to have representatives from Cooperative Extension, the Kentucky Division of Forestry, Fish and Wildlife, NRCS, conservation districts, all the organizations and groups that are available to work with woodland owners on their property, or landowners for that matter, on their property, are going to be at this event. There is a registration for this event. It is $15, but we will feed you a really nice dinner for that. So you'll more than get your money's worth, certainly in that regard. There is a link there that you can get to find the registration for that. And if you have any questions about this, Dr. Amanda Gumbert has been the lead organizer on this. So you can pop her a question, or I could maybe answer one or two if we got any here. But this is a great opportunity for landowners that really may not be connected, Renee. So we're trying to reach out. So this is something where I really will ask our viewers and listeners, if you know of landowners that are really not engaged in the management of their property, please connect them with this workshop, right? It's a great opportunity for them to get a lot of information in a really short period and hopefully get them on the way to being good stewards of their land. So please help us spread the word about this. And then finally, I just wanted to give a note to our upcoming programs. We've got a lot of those on From the Woods today in May. Fortunately, Renee, we get an extra week. So we got 5 weeks of programming in May. So I'm excited about that. We're going to be covering a lot of topics. Next week, Dr. Crocker and I are going to take a split on this top 10 issues, tree issues that landowners face. So don't miss that. We'll be talking about how to respond to wildfires. We did have a recent cancellation at the last minute on the May 17th. So we'll be filling that in real soon. And then we got Dr. Crocker coming back in May again with pesky plants. And then Dr. Springer has been working with a veterinarian to do this new podcast called Wildly Infectious, a wildlife health podcast. So he's going to give us a preview about that. So if you're interested in wildlife and maybe some of the diseases that are impacting wildlife, not only here in Kentucky, but around the region and world, this will be a podcast of interest to you. So check us out each Wednesday at 11 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll have these. And these shows are typically posted about a week or less afterwards. So make sure you join us at one of these, and please help us spread the word about these programs. Let others know who might benefit from them.
Definitely. And we every now and then we will get somebody saying, I don't know what this is, and you can go to fromthewoodstoday.com if you happen to be walking in your woods, and we have a little survey on there that you can click, and you're like, what is that? Take a picture and send it to us. We've actually done shows on things that people have requested or submitted wanting to know what it was. So we're always looking for ideas for anything that's going on in your woods, and you never know. Hopefully you don't find anything that we don't know about, but if you do, I know there's a lot of folks here in forestry that definitely would want to know about it. If there's something that's just like, I don't know what that is, so we definitely want to hear from you.
Yeah, no doubt. We've talked about some of the invasive plants and insects. If you see any of those, certainly getting them early before they get a chance to spread is a critical thing. But again, if you see something kind of unique or something you're unfamiliar with, let us know. Like Renee said, we'll feature you on the show sometime. And we really want to be locally relevant to you. So if this is information that's important and valuable to you all, it's more than likely important to others in your area as well. So we want to try to help wherever we can. So a big thanks again to our guest for today's show, and thank you, our viewers, for being with us, and our listeners on a weekly basis. We greatly appreciate it.
We definitely do. And join us again next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. Until then, take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today.